Hello, everyone. Welcome to Silver Lining. I'm Kevin Ashley.
I'm Nicole Littlefield.
I'm Joey Westlow.
And as y'all can see here, we have yet again another guest. Joey used to be a writer at the Courier and one of, I would say, a really good writer that the Courier had. Because, like, from the articles that he's written, from the articles that I were interviewed for before I even joined the Courier, they're like, he writes good shit.
When you were on staff, you were definitely the writer that I looked up to the most. I that you were the because I just started and you were like this such a great writer. You are still a great writer. And I was just like, man, I want to write like this.
I'm
I
glad you're
remember,
still a
I
good
remember
writer.
before I
I'd like
even,
to say that I peaked back then.
I
And
remember
Kevin
before I
probably only
even
appreciated
joined.
articles that were about him in the first place, which were very interesting articles. We covered almost every topic you possibly could.
Yeah, even things I knew nothing about. I just was like, I'm pretty sure I could like logic my positions on these things, and
That's
like
how
I could
every
just
article begins. You have 1 week to basically submerge yourself in every source you possibly can to become a mini expert on your topic. When before the week started, you barely knew anything about that topic.
yep. This is why I think I managed to like fare so well when it came to like starting out as a writer. Because one of the things when I came into the career, I was really looking forward to working with you. So when I found that you had like graduated that year, I was like, oh well, fine. But it was also the fact that like if there's one thing that, and I feel like I bring this up in like every freaking podcast, but at speech and debate, when I did extemporaneous speaking, you would have like 30 minutes to come up with a 7 minute speech. So
Mhm.
finding precise information and being able to use that appropriately when writing your articles, I understand how like hard that can be. But like having like a week to like submerge yourself into it and figure that shit out is surprisingly helpful. And then you like find people who are more like informed on the topic for your interviews and bada bing bada boom.
Yeah, the improvisational skills that you learn in forensics is incredibly important because when you're talking to somebody, they often go on tangents and you realize, oh, that's the golden material that I wasn't even thinking of in the first place.
Mm-hmm. That
Um,
mixed on top of the
what?
fact that like I know for like at least actually no for like one of the articles that you interviewed me for, I
Mhm.
knew like very little about the topic. But because at that point I had like started my like speech and debate journey, I was like, I'm gonna just let him talk, and then I'll pick up what I'm going to talk about from what he says. Because you like in the interviews like ramble and extrapolate a lot, so I was like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
say like portions of his sentence and reword them and just add a bit more on top of what he said.
The tangents, they're always the most wonderful things. And I remember I was doing an article at Fermilab on quantum computing because they were developing quantum computers, sending messages on fiber optic cables from Fermilab to Argonne National Laboratory underground. And as I'm doing it, one of the physicists starts talking about this cancer treatment, this proton beam cancer treatment that Fermilab was designing and now is implemented as well. And I was like, oh no, that's the real story. I was like, that's probably more exciting than what I'm currently working on, even though the quantum computing one it turned out to be brilliant because uh, the Defense Department's currently funding it massively because they think it's the future of cybersecurity. So if you have one message and somebody tries to intercept that message, they cannot encrypt what it's saying unless they have both halves of the message. And when I when I was talking with the physicist about proton beam cancer therapy, I was like, how do people not know about this? And so, those happy accidents fall into our laps.
It's one of the things that I wish I could kind of do when it comes to interviewing people in the journalism aspect is being able to like well practically hunt down individuals and say, hey, give me an interview. Like it's all done electronically, like through emails or through other people who know
Yeah,
other people
it's a
know other
different
people. And
game now.
like it's a different game and it's a different feel. And it's the only thing that I know at this point in time. So I don't really mind it. But if I could do things similar to what I did for Courier TV back when I took
Mhm.
that class, because in Courier TV, I managed to like write this one, well, not write, but I did this one news package where we managed to some land an interview with like the mayor of Naperville, and it was talking about how Naperville, whether or not they're going to get a recreational marijuana dispensary. Which, by the way, that vote ended up passing, which surprised me to like high heaven. It passed by like 8 votes. Like it was a very close referendum that they did. But yeah, and just like being able to get in contact with individuals, find them where they are, be like, hey, let's talk about this controversial topic and see where it goes from there is something I would have loved to done for the Courier while writing,
Mhm.
but just wasn't in the cards when I joined.
A weird thing that always kind of surprised me is because we are a community college. And so when I would schedule interviews with people, I'm not entirely sure the level of professionalism they were expecting. And so like when I did one downtown at the American Civil Liberties Union office, uh, I spread out all my notes. I take out my laptop. I mean, I was clearly well researched, and I think it kind of catches the person off guard. And once they're slightly caught off guard, it humanizes them. They kind of let down their defenses and talk in a more human way to you. So they don't give politician type of answers. They give you answers that your readers can relate to and learn from, which is what we're trying to get in the first place.
And when it comes to the politician speak, that was like my first time being like exposed to it as well. Because you always
Yeah.
see it in like media or like on the news or just random stuff that you can't really like internalize. But like dealing with that in person, like when I was talking to that man, basically every question I would ask him, he had like this press assistant behind us. So I saw his eyes from time to time when I'd ask him a question about like what about this with recreational marijuana? His eyes would dart to her, I'd notice. And then I'm assuming she would like nod if he could answer that question. And then he'd answer the
Yeah,
question.
that's the
And at one
dance.
point, and at one
That's the
point I
little
just
dance.
yep. And I just flat out asked him like point blank. So what are your thoughts? Like what's your opinion when it comes to legalizing recreational, having a recreational marijuana dispensary in
Yeah.
Naperville? And he's flat out said, "Oh, my opinion." And that was a definite one where he looked. I just saw him just flat out just look at her and just
I
like,
love that you had the
well, I
courage.
guess.
See, the first time I encountered something like that, it was when COD had their athletic department scandal. And the poor guy they were having take the fall, the director of the athletic department, I met there, and his, let's just call her a lawyer, but the person guiding what he could or could not say was sitting in the room with him. And it's the exact same thing. He turned his head, looked to her, and then looked back at me. But I didn't have the courage like you to just be like, all right, please talk to me without her. So I basically wrote the article painting him as being somebody who was apathetic to my questions. You know, if he turned his head, I put that in the article. If he didn't respond, I put that in the article. And at the end of the day, that's so much worse than giving a bad answer.
Mm-hmm.
Seeming like you're apathetic to your school's newspaper. I mean, it was hard to account for that.
And that might explain why the athletic department is so like iffy now to like it have anyone talk to them about their internal workings. Because I remember working at Courier TV, and we were specifically told that like because of like their scandal in the past and like some newspapers questions that they got, they're now more tight-lipped when it comes to trying to get interviews from them. So like these things have like weight and traction and so much around them that impact other areas, which I also found it pretty interesting.
Yeah, I remember there was a press freeze, so we couldn't talk to coaches. And so we try to talk to individual players because, I mean, we're writing for the people. We're trying to figure out, they were banned from all postseason play, which if you're at a community college, that's where the recruiters are at. So that's your
Mm-hmm.
golden ticket to your next school. That's a huge impact upon their lives. And they didn't know, they weren't informed until like a couple of weeks before postseason was supposed to begin for like football and baseball and all that stuff.
That all their
And
training
so
and
I would
effort was going to
interview
waste.
students, and then the coaches would be like, and the students would walk away from me and I wouldn't be able to use it. Um, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, especially considering when I started with the paper, I was a sports writer. So a lot of that job entailed the coaches basically selling their attributes to me so they continue making the big bucks at the school.
I forgot that you were the sports writer for a while. That it's I don't exactly know why, but I know that the Courier legend is that it's like that's the bad position at the Courier.
It doesn't have to be. So, a little unknown secret. uh, Whatever school you go to, if it stays like Northwestern or University of Chicago, or you pick up a local newspaper, around 80% of the times, the best writer is going to be the sports writer. They get away with more artistic license than any of the other cut and dry articles. Because the other ones, they're more just like traditional conservative bylines and no flowery language, no opinions. The sports writers, they take it to a new art form. The Daily Herald has a fantastic writer called Barry Rosner who he shows what the art form can truly do. So when I was doing sports, and basically I was hired just because as a hockey player, I was like, oh, of course he should know what he's doing. I use sports universal transcendency to talk about politics. Because it was first when like LeBron James was starting to have political beliefs, and Fox News would crack down on him and saying, shut up and dribble. And I'm basically saying, no, sports and politics have been wound around each other like a double helix structure of DNA since the beginning of time. And it was a great way to talk about politics while also talking sports, kind of like Anthony Bourdain. So you know how Anthony Bourdain it's a food show, but he'd use it to talk politics, because you need something to break that wall with the persons you're talking to, because then you can figure out, what makes them tick, what inspires them, how did their parents inspire them, and it helps you achieve a more holistic outlook on life.
It's easier to relate to them, like with the Anthony Bourdain and like the cooking. Like I could listen to anyone talk if they're just like cooking in front of me. Like it's so memorizing.
Yeah. And when people can touch that personal part of you, you reveal things about yourself that maybe you were even thinking. So I remember one of my sports articles was about North Korean and South Korean diplomacy during the Olympics. My very first one was about Native American imagery and how offensive it is for those who are Native Americans. And while we don't have a sizable Native American population at COD, we do have a population. And this was before like the Washington Redskins changed their team name, got rid of the Redskins slur, got rid of their logo. But it was a very eye-opening article, especially for my very first one. And you realize when you can touch on something so passionate with another person, that's what it's all about when you're writing. I mean, that almost does all the work for you. No matter how good of a writer you are, if they say those golden words, the story's there for you.
Yeah.
And this brings up a very interesting question, which I'm going to now pose to Nicole. You've been writing for a while at this point, at least longer than me. So, like, what was like your like big eye-opening article that made you see more about what this is about?
Well, I got pushed into it. So like there was a plank and I jumped off of it, or I had to walk the plank basically. It was horrible. Just because I didn't know what I was doing. I went to COD and I really missed the writing community that I had in high school. So I was looking for that and I found the Courier and I thought it was just like a volunteer type thing. And I went in and I actually think Joey was the one who talked to me and was like, no, this is a paid position. And I was like, oh, cool.
It was.
So yeah. And then I got hired and Jim was like, what do you want to write about? And I was like, I don't know. I'll let you know tomorrow. And then my brother was, he wasn't going to COD at the time, but he was like, he knew about some of the stuff happening or like in the cyber world. So my very first article was about cyber, like it was a cyber competition. And it was really interesting, but I also had no idea what I was doing because I didn't really understand technology or cyber stuff. And I didn't know how to write this article. So it was very scary. So that was really the start of it all. And after that, I kind of figured out how to go about it. Jim always says that the best stories are about people. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm writing, especially because like Joey said, sometimes they have that golden ticket like quote, and that's what you make your whole story about.
What was the article you did? I think it was earlier in your career. It was about like domestic violence in a charity.
Yeah, the PAVE.
Yeah, yeah.
The, it was about this woman who founded this program called PAVE for assault survivors. It was a really cool story. Her story was interesting, and she was just trying to empower other people. I think it was like a run like I remember it was called like Runway to Pave. So I think it was like a
Okay.
fashion show.
Collect funds for it.
Yeah.
All right, all right. Um, when it came to like eye-opening things for me, and like my writing career has not been like that long. I feel like 9, 10 months at this point. I don't really know,
Longer
but
than some other people's.
I mean that's true. But I had like a two-pronged thing. For starters, I was in the similar boat as like Nicole, where Jim really doesn't have like a sink or swim mentality with this. It just kind of like pushes you into the deep end. If you live, you live. If you don't, well, I'll bring you back and we'll push you back in again. So my first article was a halfway eye opener for me because that's when I finally came to the conclusion that my opinion actually provokes people and
Mm.
like what I have to say on a matter can well draw enough people to actually like can make enough people care to not only read the article but comment after it. Now, all those comments were negative, but I found that to be fairly inspiring because they cared enough about what I had to say to not just like stop reading and go on about their day, or once they finish the article, say I'm an idiot and then go on about their day. No, they cared enough to not only read my article, but then go into the comment section and write a fucking thesis disagreeing with what I had to say. So that was an eye-opening part for me that like these things have impact. What I can say has like impact on individuals, positive or negative. And then the second part is when I wrote my article on a food bank. And at that point, I was like, and when I saw the amount of people who like read that article, I'm like, this can like genuinely help people. And what I wrote about, talking about the resources that are allotted to these people in this trying time of like mass unemployment and like, because it's like during like the thick of the pandemic, and like the Glen Ellen Food Bank was really like going working like overtime in order to like help people and serve their needs and be as COVID safe as possible, which they've managed to successfully do because they haven't had to close down once because of COVID because they've followed these guidelines so efficiently and effectively. So once I got that article out, and although it didn't get a lot of comments, it did get a lot of views. I was like, this is incredible. Like, this is something that can actually like help people. I don't know if the people who read my article actually used the food bank after or like got any like good thing out of it. But ultimately, this is out there now, and this can help people, and that I thought to be pretty cool in its own right as well. It's gotten me more into journalism as like a whole thing.
We were lucky being at a community college because we were kind of the center of our community. Where I know Diana Martinez from the MAC, she used to help raise funds for the Glen Ellen Food Pantry, and all these hot button issues they seem to always center at College of DuPage. No matter what they were, you always had a group of people who were for or against something. You always had different initiatives. You had different charity groups. We always were the center of basically our little universe, and we were lucky to be able to write about it.
Mm-hmm. And like, I remember you were the one who told me that like the executive board and like the people high up in the COD bureaucracy usually use the college as like a springboard in the state politics,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I found to be incredibly fascinating that a community college had that much like clout to
Well, that's
put you
how.
somewhere else.
Yeah, so when you're launching your political careers, you start on school boards most of the time, and this isn't just COD. This is most places. It's just that's how you get your first governance experience. With COD, you have the abilities to maximize your funding from different groups because you have maximum exposure. And so you had a lot of people on the board who have gone on to political careers rather quickly. And so when you're talking with them about specific issues that both impact the students and the teachers union, a lot of times you wonder, why they make the decisions they make, and if it's at the behest of their own initiatives or the beneficial things of our school. So it was always give and take with that.
Yeah.
And I'm always shocked who gets elected and who doesn't during their things. But in the end of the day, you know, they do a lot of hard work, and the students do have a say if we want to get something done at the school. It's not like they don't listen to us completely. They do.
Yeah, because I remember during like an open forum that the college board was having like students about like the teachers on like the brink of striking, that
Yeah.
the amount of students who showed up in support of the professors was like shaking to them. Like they're like, oh, people like genuinely care about what's going on. We should probably like do something, you know?
Yeah, I was actually surprised at the acrimony on that one coming from the board, because I had to cover both sides. Well, all three sides, I guess. The student side. Actually, that was more left to the rest of the Courier staff, and they did a great job with that. But I covered the teacher union, the adjunct faculty union, and then the board, including President Caputo, and the negotiations. And that dragged on for a while, if you can remember. That got quite hostile. Eventually, they came around to their senses, but I was surprised at how unwilling the board was to support the teachers, because I mean, that's what makes COD such a great institution.
And
that's what shocked me when I came to COD. I like many of people, didn't have the best opinion of what a community college was. And then I go up and I'm like, these professors, not all of them, but a lot of them, they're life-changing. They are brilliant. They push the students. You get that one-on-one interaction. And then the students, you know, I think half my classes were filled with international students who, like one girl in one of my political science classes had a doctorate from Harare, Zimbabwe, but nothing transferred. So she had to start from the bottom all over again here, because she was a political refugee from Robert Mugabe's regime at the time. And, you know, nowhere else are you getting an experience like that in a classroom. Yeah. And I was in Professor Goldberg's class, and I know you had him as well. First off, and you're talking about like world politics from a textbook, but when you have people in the classroom who have actually lived those experiences, it brings the things in the textbook to life in a different way.
That's like a major thing for me too. And I always go on about this, either like on the podcast or like in person with other people, that the quality of professors, and I just say it's not everyone, but so far from what I've experienced and what the experience of people I've talked to, it's so high. Like that genuine connection they try to make, and how just like good they are. What
Professor
they've done.
Ira Noka, who doesn't belong at the COD.
There's just like so many teachers who you could see be like at like a private institution working here at a community college, because not only do they generally care, but they're just good at what they do and they help.
It's because a lot of them are doing what they teach. So they're out there doing professional jobs, and the teaching is, you know, it's only half their lives. It's not their full commitment.
It's their side hustle.
So inspiring if you're a student, because you get to see like, oh, you know, for sociology or for English, this teacher is doing what I'm studying to do, so I could do it as well.
That's even how it is at the Courier. Like Jim is working part-time at the Daily Herald, and while he helps us, I think it's funny because during our last podcast, we actually talked about how great the professors are, but it's great to see that even more people think that COD's teachers are wonderful.
Not all.
But I've been pretty lucky. I have not had a professor yet that I would despise having them again.
Oh, see, I have, and I was nervous about that applying to my next schools, because I had a bunch of withdrawals on my thing. I had like probably around 9, and they were because I was in the classroom like, this teacher just ain't doing it for me. And so I found a teacher who, you know, could inspire me and move me. And every time I made that decision, it was the right decision, because I would end up at like Professor Tom Carter of physics. I had him and he just changed my life. You know, I wouldn't have been in his class if I didn't drop the other ones that I were in, where the teachers were just carrying dead weights.
Yeah. And speaking of like trying to find inspiration in order to like keep moving on, when you like graduated from COD,
Yeah.
COVID hit and everything shut the fuck down. How did you like, with your incredibly extroverted personality and your drive to write news articles, how did you like, what did you do over this like time period?
Cried myself to sleep every night. Um,
Mood.
so I despise virtual learning. I took a math class that was like that. It's just not something I excel at. I know a lot of people, they do excel at it, and given their circumstances in their life, they need virtual education. It's just not something I'm comfortable with. So I knew my next institution, wherever I would go to, it would be virtual if I would have went right away. And also it would have been a detriment and a safety issue if I would have brought COVID back home to my family, given my parents' health. So it was kind of like a no-brainer for me there. But it was a massive transition because, working at the paper, which is basically, we could plug in 40 hours, 20 hours a week, but we're plugging in a lot more. And all of a sudden you're just at home, which I still have a whole bunch of library books, by the way, that are overdue since last March. Yeah, so I basically went and did the traveling that I always wanted to do around the country, because as a journalist, you write stories about other people's lives in places that you're trying to imagine without ever having even been there. And when you do that, it creates a dissonance in your empathy for them. So I think a perfect example is Rolling Stone did an article about Lordstown, Ohio, where they have an automotive plant that was shut down. They talked about the individual lives that were affected because Trump didn't have their backs and for GM to move out. And as I was traveling to upstate New York, that's one of the places I stopped. And so I after reading the article, all these places, I got to see where the shutdown factory was, how immense it was. The people in the town with signs in their front yards that still said, "Don't abandon us." I mean, something like that touches you on a more visceral level, that when you're writing, you need to be able to get the empathy within yourself. So I went out towards Colorado with my cousin. We did a lot of backpacking, hiking, climbing in the San Juan Mountains for a couple months. And why we chose that area is because those areas used to be a boomtown for silver mines. And I was always kind of obsessed with the labor abuses that the miners used to face. And so when you go there, you just learn about history in a whole different level, and it brings that history to life. Like there was one where the workers really get boiled alive because they would dig so far deep and there was no way for them to escape. And the hours were just horrendous. And it's interesting to put yourself in those places. You don't put yourself in those shoes, but you could still see some of their pain that never really healed. And when you write about labor issues or unions or even coal mines or stuff like that, you need a more nuanced view of all the different viewpoints. You can't just come in it from your own narrow ideology. I mean, me specifically, I'm a very liberal person. Obviously, I'm not for big coal. But me traveling to a coal town, that's something incredibly different. You see things in a different light. You see the faces, you see the children that are affected by those political decisions, and it makes those political decisions real.
Yeah, that makes a absolute gigaton of sense. Like
Yeah.
I've started having more like, because I've always on like a surface level understood like the plight of the small town and like how there are entire towns and sections of our country that are devoted to like manufacturing and industry, and when those industries go to the places, those towns, people suffer
Yeah.
accordingly. Like it all makes sense in my head and the data points and all that different stuff, but like I didn't really understand viscerally how bad a factory moving out of when that factory employs like 85% of the town until, well, funny enough, because of quarantine and TikTok, because I started like running into creators who would like who lived in Appalachia and
Oh, okay.
saw how like they would show me how their towns, which like when they were younger, were like booming and whatnot, and then current like free trade agreements were signed, and then the industry went to other places, and the towns just died and became decrepit, and no one really had the money to move out, or they didn't want to leave because that was their home for generations at that point.
Yeah.
And there's just so many layers that adds the humanity on top of that
Yeah,
you don't
absolutely.
really get unless you like either see it in person or see someone describe it accurately with photos and videos.
Yeah, Bruce Springsteen did a song called Youngstown, which is about an old industrial town in northeast Ohio. And when the lyrics in the song is Hitler did what the big boys, oh wait, the big boys did what Hitler couldn't do, basically saying that they desolated the factories, that the corporate bigwigs, they made the money, abused the workers, and then moved out once they got their pockets filled, left the workers behind. It's rather interesting. And here in Illinois, this isn't like a foreign issue. Illinois, we have towns that are built around factories. West Chicago is the Gel Sart factory that a lot of Latino workers work in. I know down south, one of the big issues is towns that are built around nuclear plants. So the nuclear plants that are basically run by ComEd, that Governor Pritzker is going to have to bail out something like, I think it's $70 million every year for the next 5 years just to keep them running because they can't compete with like cheaper natural gas. So do we provide the subsidies to keep these factories, these plants open, or do we let basically them to abandon the workers? Because it's not as easy to retrain for a job as somebody as young as the three of us would think. If you worked your entire life on like an oil pipeline and we're just saying, well, transition to green energy, learn how to do something with solar panels. It's not as simple as you would think. It takes time and it takes patience. And these are people's lives. So a lot of hard work would need to go into the plannings for these type of towns.
This stuff doesn't even just affect the workers. One of my speech mates, their speech was about this place called Cancer Alley, and I can't remember exactly where it's located, but it's like you were saying, these like businesses, and they pump out so much like toxins that these people in the town next door are more likely to get cancer, hence the name Cancer Alley.
Yeah. It's a little on the nose there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's
And
a pride when something like that happens in your town, but there's labor abuses as well. So
they can't do anything about it because the property price went down. Like no one wants to live there, so they can't leave because they don't have enough money to just pack up and go, and so they're
Mhm.
just stuck there, most likely going to get cancer from this corporation.
Which is why I've
what's
always like hated the conservative argument that like if you can't find work where you're at, just pack up and move. Like moving is expensive. And do you legitimately think that people don't think about moving if they can't find work somewhere? Like not everybody has the ability to just like take a backpack worth of stuff and then move halfway across the
Yeah,
nation.
it's a
Like
liberty.
exactly. That is a very like you're in a privileged position if you can just like move at the drop of a dime.
The answer to that is subsidizing either vocational training or new workplace training,
Mhm.
allowing people to stay on their feet while they undergo training. And that's interesting because that kind of plays into Biden's new plan of redefining how we look at infrastructure. Because if we're going to meet some of the emission targets, the CO2 emission targets that we're trying to hit, it will take a lot of retraining.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I hate how the rebuttal to like Biden's like infrastructure and family plan is the fact that like none of this is common sense. Like, how did we allow the right to have a monopoly on the phrase common sense? I'll never understand. Because there's a lot of things that are just like if you look at the situation at its surface, then common sense would dictate one thing. However, if we go deeper into that issue, you find, oh, wait, it's not actually that simple as 2 plus 2. This
Well,
isn't
it
like
does.
addition. This is like a law. This isn't addition. This is like a long division. Like these things are more complicated than you lead them to be.
Common sense is because they want bare bones funding. They
Yeah.
want infrastructure to mean streets, roads, and bridges. They don't want it to mean universal pre-K. They don't want family leave. They
Because
don't
like when
want
you
all these other
invest
things. which are the building blocks to a nation. That's what
Yeah.
infrastructure actually is. Free community college.
Because infrastructure is investing in your nation, and to invest in your nation,
Yeah,
you invest in
yeah.
the people, because the people are the nation.
And I
So
love
if
the
you're
argument that's made that anything that's in Biden's proposal that isn't traditional infrastructure is automatically socialism. When if you look at countries in Europe, and not even the democratic socialist ones, we're being left behind on issues like family leave.
yeah,
Yeah,
like I talk to like my European friends and I tell them about like the differences between here and like the differences between their country. And it's just one like massive thing of them being like, you guys don't have like paid sick leave, or because like is I also mentioned this in like my first ever article where I talked about how having like a livable wage is not socialism, how having like maternity or like or paternity leave is not like socialism. These are the
yeah,
things that help people and a happier like especially if you think about it from like a capitalist point of view, which I would assume that like the conservatives were more capitalistic, that having a population that is not only like well fed, well dressed, well taken care of, and like well paid leads to a happier population. And a happier population is a more productive population. Like if you keep people just above poverty, they're not going to be as efficient as someone who is not only above poverty, but has a little bit of extra cash to spend on luxury items, which pushes the economy forward. Like I'm not an economist, but that seems like common sense to me.
yeah. Nicole, do you want to talk a little bit about your community college article that you're currently writing, the free community college?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't. I'm just starting on it. Someone posted something in our group chat saying that we could write about that and how it was coming out. And because Biden had his speech on Wednesday, talking about, well, he talked a lot of things. But he was talking about his plan. I can't remember the exact name of it. It's like the Families Care Initiative or something like that. But part of it is that he's wanting to give free community college to minority groups.
My understanding was it's everyone that is under a certain socioeconomic status.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. That's where I'm like, I don't know who it exactly applies to. From what I was reading, it was very like it was a very broad term, but it was more focused on people, the groups that don't have a lot of resources, giving back to like groups in poverty and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Overall, I mean, do we support the idea of free community college? Do we support the fact that it could be labeled as infrastructure?
I don't know. I'm interested to see how this plays out, how it goes. I think quite honestly, I don't think it should be free community college. I think that we need to focus on the actual education system first, because I went to a good high school and I still don't think my education was that great. Like there is still a lot of things that I was learning in college that I should have learned in high school. So to me, I'm like, why are we focusing on higher education? We should just be focusing on the bare basics of education before we move on to
A
higher
complete education system overhaul
Yeah.
that
I
costs
can
money.
I can definitely get behind that idea because I remember, so I didn't always like live in DuPage County. I used to live in a school district that was significantly poorer than the school district that I moved to. And for starters, like the stark contrast between the two. Like the school district I went to wasn't exactly like dirt poor, but they did not have a lot of the resources that like when because I came to I moved to Wheaton back in like 2012 or around that area. Like I was like halfway through seventh grade, and I experienced my first half of seventh grade at my old school district, which was it was a good school district. The teachers did the best that they could with the resources that they had, but a lot of the stuff was like really like used equipment. Nothing was all that new that often. It was a lot of like I remember back in like elementary school, like my teachers like buy supplies from time to time, like that sort of thing. And then we move to Wheaton and I go to Edison Middle School. And all of this stuff is like brand new. Nothing's really all like that hand me down. Like there are a couple books here that make sense that like were used multiple times by students, but for the most part, everything was like fairly up to date. There were laptop carts. Like a laptop cart was something that I heard about the high schoolers got, but not really something that a middle schooler would get. And then we like actively use them, and they were like a part of our like lesson plans. And just the resources that were given were completely different, and that like surprised me. And the level of education there is different too, depending on the amount of like, well, yeah, just depending on the wealth that's in that district, because it all goes back to like how the schools are funded and all that different stuff. So when it comes to like Americans' education, I really do believe that our decentralized way of doing it and then relying it all on the property taxes of that area is not, well, fair or right, because there are so many different ways that it's done that no one, I think, is getting a proper education, because no one either has, so people have too many resources that aren't utilized properly, or too little that aren't utilized enough, and it's just this,
I
it's a
think
whole
some
thing.
conservatives fear parity. Because they take pride in the district that they live in, um, as emblematic of how well they've achieved in life, their successes. Be like, this is how good my school is. I live in this district, and if it strictly was federal funding, there'd be more parity between the schools. Like College of DuPage is a tremendous community college, and in many retrospects, better than the other community colleges in the state. If it was sheerly federal funding, um, I'm not necessarily sure that would be the same case.
It's a situation where, as far as I can gather from my limited knowledge on the topic, that there's no like real easy fix, because each area, because America is such a massive country with over 300 million people, so each area has its own history and its own thing that should be taught, which is why I understand the decentralized focus, because what matters to somebody who lives in the Midwest is not exactly going to matter to people who live on the East Coast, and people live in the South, it doesn't really matter, or somebody lives on the West Coast type stuff. So to have like local and regional histories and the things that happen there be taught makes sense for that decentralized format. But when it comes to like the general education stuff, like your math, your English, and your science, the level is so different depending on where you're at. It's something that's always been strange to me.
I think some people want to have control over the curriculum as well, and they fear if there was federal funding providing the biggest part of their funding, that they would no longer be able to control what students are learning
Mm-hmm.
or
Like
their future.
like Alabama only, like as of like a couple days ago, said that okay, it's okay to mention the existence of LGBTQ plus individuals in our health classes, and teachers no longer have to tell students that if they're gay they'll die of AIDS.
Mm,
So like that state is just getting out of the dark ages when it comes to like teaching people about health and how to have safe sex and stuff like that. Like that is the type of thing that I think is like a big negative of these decentralization, the way we have it, and leads into how what you just said about how people just want so much control over the curriculum in order to push what they
yeah.
think is right. So it's just, yeah, it's just a really weird situation. And on the topic of talking about how colleges currently are and how education is, isn't like legislation being passed to like, Joey, you were saying just something about that?
Oh, yeah. So Deanne Mazzacci, who used to be a member of the board, um, back during the Broider scandal, um, currently is sponsoring a bill that passed the state house, I believe, and it hasn't been voted before the state senate yet. Basically ensuring if you go to a community college and if your grades are above a 3.0 or are a 3.0 or above, you have to get consideration from the University of Illinois, which is our state's flagship university. Um, and while I do support any legislation that could have colleges, especially elite colleges, take more looks at community college students, because we work our asses off, we've done the hard work, and we've proven ourselves. Where a lot of times the high school students, they're immature and they haven't proven themselves yet. Uh, I do fear that with it being a 3.0 requirement, the other state schools are going to kind of fall off the wayside, or maybe not give prominence to community college students. So your Illinois State, your NIU, your Southern Illinois, um, like I told you earlier, I think if you get a B in English Comp 101, you're not necessarily cut out to succeed at University of Illinois. And I think that there is a level of discrimination that community college students face at their next school. You know, it's not something we want to believe, but it's accurate. No matter where you go, there's going to be some people thinking, oh, they don't necessarily belong here. They just come from a community college. If it's the case that we're flooding U of I with more students that have a lower GPA than some of the other students that qualify to get there, that could just increase the ostracization that we already have to overcome. It feels like we have to prove ourselves all over again when we basically did that. You know, we earn our ways into colleges. So, you know, having a speedway to U of I isn't necessarily a bad thing. I was curious what you guys thought about the 3.0 limit. I thought, you know, U of I, I'm thinking like a 3.5 or above. I know that's kind of like going into the fine print, but I do think it makes a big difference.
Nicole, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think it should be higher. I don't know. I don't really understand why they're doing it. I mean, I understand that, like you said, that community college students tend to not be accepted into these schools. But is this a school that was doing that originally and is now, because I actually like I'm going to U of I in Champaign, so I'm kind of like that it doesn't really make sense to me. Um, I have higher than a 3.0.
I was just going to ask that. Would you feel cheated if somebody with a lower GPA got in just because of this legislation while you basically worked your ass off at CUD?
Yeah, I mean, if I was working my ass off to get that 4.0 GPA to make sure that I got into the school, and then all of a sudden they released this saying that 3.0 and higher gets accepted, that would be kind of annoying just because, you know, I could have slacked off a little bit.
Not that you ever would.
Yeah, obviously, never. But it, yeah, I guess I just don't really quite understand why they're doing it. And it just feels like it's drawing more attention to the fact that the community college students don't get accepted as easily.
Is it interesting that it passed unanimously? There was no dissent, considering in our state house there is always dissent.
Yeah. I never knew that we could be unanimous on anything.
The way I think about like this current situation is my thoughts on it are fairly like back and forth because I understand, at least I think I understand what they're trying to do because they're trying to like increase the odds of community college students being able
Yeah.
to like get into prestigious universities because like they're community college students and community college usually has like a negative connotation to it, so those like admissions people usually like discriminate against them. So I get that. My main, I guess, concern kind of leads back into yours. However, I don't really like think that just because other people had to work harder to get there, that necessarily diminishes anything. You know?
No, it just makes you, it depends. When they accept you, they're basically saying we're investing in you because we think you can succeed at this institution.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think a question for the both of you. Do you think that admissions process should be more holistic than just a GPA? Because I mean, we, you know, for the paper, we do all these extracurriculars. I know a lot of people work at different clubs at COD. The admissions counselors, they don't spend a lot of time on your application. You know, it's kind of a quick looking at the numbers, seeing what else you could see, any eye catchers. It's just, they're just flooded with so many people. Do you think there is a different barometer that should be used besides a GPA to sell how well we can succeed at our next institution?
110% yes. When it comes to my thoughts, because like people are more than like their GPA. GPAs are impacted by a absolute gigaton of factors, from how the class was run to how the professor is to how the student is taught to how whether or not that teacher student tile worked for them. Like the GPA, although important, I don't think should be the whole aspect of it, which is why I think when it comes back to this law, that could be a benefit. Because if you're looking at multiple students that have a GPA of like 3.0 or above, well, then you have to weed through those 3.0s to see which one of those could be an even like better mark for your college. You look at the other stuff they've done as well. You're not just accepting anyone who got like a B in their comp English class. You're also looking at the other stuff that they did. And I think that's one of the things that could be encouraged by this.
Yeah, and I
Have,
think I'll get a little personal here. So I applied to 7 different schools, and one of them was Florida, and Florida's a good school, and I thought that I had less of a chance to get in there than my more elite schools because the way their admissions is set up, I'm basically just a number. They didn't take any essay, they don't take letters of rec, they don't take a CV resume. They basically just look at your GPA and that's it. And other schools that I applied to, like a Princeton, where most of the kids are going to have a 4.0 or 3.9, they ask for so many other details than the GPA because, once everyone has the same GPA, it's irrelevant. So they made me submit essays that I wrote in certain classes. I think it was 4 letters of rec were required for that. Their essays that they wanted me to write in were very personal essays and a lot of questions. It's very in detail because they're trying to learn more about the person. And I just thought this is the way other schools should be doing it as well, because a lot of the schools I came across were more like Florida and not like the Princeton, where they just want to see your numbers. And I realized they have a large volume of people, but there's still got to be a better way.
Mm-hmm. That's why I really liked the application process of Columbia, because I'm applying towards there for the fall semester.
Yeah.
And I'm also applying to 2 schools in Georgia and like one in California and some shit. And out of all of them, Columbia was like the only school that like asked me about my, well, went a bit further about my financial situation, asked about the clubs and activities I've done, asked more about my personal life and what I've like gone through. Like they wanted to know about me and to see if I could be a fit and succeed at that college. Where the other colleges are just like, okay, we see your GPA, just give us your credits and your other stuff, and we'll see where we can put you. Like it's like you're, as you said, it's more just a number than an actual like person.
You often wonder if schools care more about their numbers as far as like percentage of people accepted or percentage of dropouts at their school or their average GPAs, or if they care more about the successes that their students can create, because that doesn't necessarily equal perfect records at the school you're going to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Columbia is a great example where you have the students with the more artistic minds that don't necessarily show up on a transcript.
Yeah. All right. We are currently hitting the end of our little podcast here. And as we like to do in the Silver Lining, we like to talk about like a little positive near the end, as the name says, a silver lining. So, Joey, given how the past year has been and all the things you've done, what is one of the more like positive things that have happened to you that you liked a lot despite what was going on in the world?
Wow, that's a broad question, especially when you're asking a nihilist. A positive thing that's come out of this. You know what? So when I started, I'll make this answer as short as possible because I could talk for 10 years about this subject. But when I first started at COD, I was a music theory student. And I was only in music theory because of the writing that lyricism allowed me to do. And so with the time off and the isolation that quarantine has caused, it gives you time to look inwards and see why are you making the decisions you're making, and are these the best decisions? And so I realized, school is brilliant, but it took me away from some of my passions. So I began writing music once again. And I'm, working on what I'm calling a literary album, which sounds like the most pretentious and annoying thing of all time. It's basically just a musical album that is meant for literature aficionados. So, it's the rhetorical and literary devices of like James Joyce, William Faulkner. It's really inspired by Edith Wharton's 1911 novella, Ethan Frome. If I can incorporate those type of things in this, that's always been my endeavor. And there's no way I would have done anything like that without quarantine. So that, you know, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who got to reconnect with some of the passions that the flame has been diminished a little bit. And that's, you know, those are the things that get you through life.
All right. That is amazing, and you love to hear it. Might need a broom for all those names you just dropped, but
those are junior high level authors that you will be required to read if we didn't have a broken education system. I will recommend, so I also a lot of time to read. So when I was backpacking, wherever I went, I always had 10 books in my backpack, and that's not a joke and people who know me know that's accurate.
Does not surprise me.
I reconnected with the classics that we were forced to read going through like junior high and high school. And they are classics for a reason. So we're talking about like your To Kill a Mockingbirds, your Catcher in the Rye, your Great Gatsby, which you should read once every 5 years. It's that brilliant. All Quiet on the Western Front, Fahrenheit 451, George Orwell's 1984.
Oh God, don't talk about 1984. Everything's 1984 nowadays. Like someone gets banned off Twitter. It's 1984. Yeah,
I actually have a good argument that it's not that. It's more of like Aldous Huxley's dystopia and Brave New World, where we
do not have the time for that.
We are inviting our own.
If we can wrap yourself up here, Joey,
ourselves and not make liberty choices. All I'm just saying is these classics exist for a reason. And sometimes we were too young to appreciate the beauty of the stories and the intricacies of them. But now that we're a little bit older, go back and read some of those books that you felt forced or compelled to read before, and they will elicit a new passion within you.
All right. I think that is an excellent end right there. And to all our listeners out there, perhaps pick up a book. And to end this out, as we always do, despite how dark the clouds may be, remember to always search for the silver lining. Thanks for listening.